Here's the first of our 5 families. These are the grasses, the plant family Poaceae. So the objectives for this are be able to describe characteristics of the grass plant family, be able to identify a plant as belonging to the grasses, be able to list several important grass species, that's going to be corn, wheat, and rice, and be able to compare and contrast this plant family with the other ones that we'll cover. First off, what do the leaves of grasses look like? Well, leaves of grasses have parallel veins. They're going to have that in common with the lilies. Now, something unique about grasses is that they have new leaves within the old leaves. So you can see on this grass plant, you see the leaf sheath and then the blade coming off of the side. Then you see the next leaf sheath is coming from within the previous leaf sheath with a leaf blade coming off of there. And you can see a cross section here where you have that stem. That's actually just the next leaf sheath coming out from within the leaf sheath. And they have a hollow pith. So the middle is just hollow. And there's 2 other species that are very similar to grasses, or 2 other families, I should say. The sedges, these are actually triangular stems, and then there are the rushes, which have round stems. And there's a saying that is, sedges have edges, and rushes are round, and grasses are hollow right down to the ground. You can cut a grass, and you're going to find that they are hollow on the inside. They're flowers. Now, we're going to cover flower anatomy later, so don't worry if these terms seem a little weird, but flowers of grass are made for wind pollination, so they will want to shed their pollen directly into the wind. You're not going to see a bumblebee landing on a grass flower, and these flowers are kind of weird. You see that palea and lemna? Those are terms we're only going to use in regards to grasses. Those anthers, however, are what gives rise to the pollen, and they're just going to shed that off into the air. And when you feel the pollen in the air tonight, you're breathing it in because they want to put the pollen in the wind. And that's why so many people have pollen allergies specifically to grasses. Now you have that stigma there, that little hairy spot, that's collecting the pollen. That's the female parts that will collect the pollen. And we see this most evidently on corn. Corn has male and female flowers. And male flowers are the tassels shown here. And they're at the top of the plant so they can optimally shed their pollen out into the wind. Corn silk is part of the stigma, and if you follow each one of those corn silk fibers back, it will connect to a corn kernel, which is the fruit. And that's right, a corn kernel is actually a fruit known as a caryopsis. Now, we're not going to use that as a vocab term because most people just call it a seed, and they do quite well in life. It turns out that the fruit is all in the wall of what we would call a seed, and most of the fruit is taken up by, well, the endosperm, which is part of the seed. We're going to cover endosperm a little later. Suffice it to say for now that it is very starchy, and that starch will serve as energy for the growing young plant. Remember, don't memorize all of these terms you see on there. We're going to cover them later, but that's a corn seed, well, corn fruit, really. And human civilization depends on that grass endosperm. In fact, the very existence of cats as pets depends entirely on grass endosperm. And we're going to cover that in class, so make sure to pay attention there. What is the superpower for the grass family? Well, they have subterranean apical meristems, which is basically to say, remember how they're hollow? They're hollow because they grow not from branches on top, but from the ground up. So if you cut one of these grasses just because, hey, I want to see if it's hollow or not, that's fine. They can regrow. And if grasses get eaten by a cow, that's fine. They can regrow. And if grasses get mowed by a lawnmower, well, you get the idea. If I have trees growing in my yard, which I often do, have little maples and little Douglas fir trying to grow in the spring, I just mow them and they die. And it stunts the weed growth when I mow the weeds. But the grasses are perfectly capable of being mowed time and time again because their superpower is that they can grow from the ground up. This also means if I burned my yard, the grass would regrow, but things like moss, which has no roots, and most of the weeds would not regrow. However, I'm not allowed to burn my yard, fire department. Now let's look at some interesting grasses. Here in America, we look at corn. And you can see those corn silk right there and those little caryopses all over that corn cob. America grows a lot of corn, especially in the Midwest. And a lot of your food will contain corn or corn byproducts because its starch is very useful. Sweet corn has a good amount of sugar in that caryopsis as well. Wheat is your historically interesting plant. This is what the Roman Empire was built on, and you can see a lot of the wheat in the Bible, actually. Western civilization was fed by wheat and rye, which comes from these Middle Eastern areas, and it's also a Chinese wheat. There are winter wheat and spring wheat, which tells you when you sow them and when you harvest them. Then we have rice. So for America, we have corn. For the Mideast and for Europe, we've got wheat, and for the Far East, we have rice. All of these grains are grasses. And this is domesticated in India and Southeast Asia. It's also harvested in America because there's actually an American type of rice where the native tribes would eat this. And they grow on the sides of rivers and lakes because they resist flooding. This also gives you a really easy way of preventing weeds from growing near rice. You just flood the area, weeds can't grow, rice can, rice wins. It's a lot easier than just going and picking all the weeds. I got a little bonus family here for you, and that's the palms. Now, they're not real trees. We're actually going to discuss what makes a real tree when we cover stems. The palm family is mainly tropical. They're hard to grow in the northern climes. The leaves, again, like grasses and lilies, have parallel veins, and they produce fruits in the forms of coconuts, so kind of fun there.